and Bonny, and Mary Reed. Horace Alexander.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, during the 17th century, my thing isn't working. Okay. No, it's a change of slides. I guess I'll have to manually do the change. Yeah. Just press that button there for me. During the 17th century, England and Spain were rivals for control of this area known as the Spanish Main. Now, during the years 1650 to around 1720, historians refer to that period as the golden age of piracy, because England encouraged piracy against Spanish ships sailing in the Caribbean Sea. Into that scene enter two women, Anne Bonny and Mary Reed, female pirates. When I refer to this to my college students, they say, oh, two badass women pirates. And I have to agree with them. Now, the first pirate was Anne Bonny. Anne Bonny's father was a lawyer who impregnated his maid. And so as to avoid the shame and disgrace and how it would affect his practice, he dressed Anne as a boy and passed her off as his personal assistant. Now later, a few years later, they moved to Carolina, what was a North American colony territory named Carolina, which you and I know was divided into North and South Carolina later. And there, Anne Bonny married a pirate named James Bonny. That's how she got the last name. But she left him shortly after for this person, John Rackham, known as Calico Jack. Now, Anne Bonny herself was known for her very red hair and her green eyes, and she had a really quick temper. So when she became Calico Jack's lover and she came on board the ship, some of those pirates were really upset, because in their belief system, it was very bad luck to have a woman on board. No pirate ship should ever have a female on board. So one of the pirates had the temerity to vocalize this reservation he had about her being on the ship. Whereupon she said, I will challenge you to hand-to-hand combat. And that's what she did. And so they started fighting, and she just ran him through and threw him overboard. From that moment on, no one ever questioned Anne Bonny's presence on the ship. Now, Mary Reed was another young woman, and she was born in England. Anne Bonny was born in Ireland. Mary Reed was born in England, and her father died when Mary was quite young. And she had a half-brother who also died fairly young. Now, this half-brother was getting an allowance from his paternal grandmother. And so Mary's mother dressed her up as her half-brother so as to keep the allowance coming. And after a few years, of course, grandma found out, and then the allowance stopped coming. But Mary continued wearing male clothes. She did work as a household helper in the male clothing. She even joined the army as a man. And she went on board a ship as a crew member as a man. Now, it so happened that she was on a Dutch ship when Calico Jack, who you already met, captured that ship and certainly killed most of the people that were on it. But according to the pirate code, any survivors of a ship that was boarded and pillaged by the pirates, any survivors would be invited to become a pirate, to join their crew. And so here was Mary Reed, dressed in men's clothing, and she was taken on to Calico Joe's ship. So now Calico Joe had two women on his ship dressed as men. Now, in October of 1720, they went on a crime spree throughout the Caribbean. In the meantime, Anne Bonny took a fancy to Mary Read, thinking she was a man. Until after a few overtures, Mary had to confess, look, I'm a woman like you. Because most of the time when Anne Bonny was on board ship, she wore men's clothing, but occasionally she wore women's clothing. But whenever they went on a raid, she always wore a male costume. So anyway, so these two women are now with Calico Jack on his boat. And they went on this crime spree. They took over a boat called the William. And they robbed other ships and they stole fishermen's cargo and they did all kinds of different crimes throughout the time. And finally, their comeuppance came in October of 1720 when they had a big party. Their ship was anchored off the coast of Jamaica, and they had a great big party for other pirates. And the whole party just devolved into a drunken brawl. Now, by this time, England had changed its mind about piracy because they had now gained the upper hand in the Caribbean. So it was now a crime to be a pirate. And so while they were out there celebrating, they found a pirate hunter saw their boat and decided, well, this is Anne and together, and go on to the next one. They found Calico Jack's ship and found most of the crew drunk and not being able to defend themselves, so they were captured. They were captured and taken to trial, and they were tried next. Their ship was captured, and they were all taken captive and taken to trial in Spanish Town. Next slide. This is Spanish Town, Jamaica. I've been in this building, but for very different reasons. So they were charged by the governor of Jamaica with crimes and piracy and being enemies of the British crown. And Calico Jack and 5 of his male crew members were convicted and were sentenced to hanging, and they were summarily hanged. In that time, you could be tried, convicted, and hanged in the very same afternoon. And that's what happened with Calico Jack and his crew members. When the women's time came for their trial, they were also found to be guilty of piracy and being enemies of the British crown, and they too were found guilty, and they were sentenced to be hung. Whereupon, they both said, "We are pregnant." So the court ordered what is referred to as an inspection, and it was determined that these two women were in their second trimester of their pregnancies, and so they could not be executed right then and there. So they were put in prison. Anne Bonny had her child in prison, and she managed to get reprieves after that. And eventually she ended up back in what was in Carolina, in what was called Charlestown, Carolina, which we now know as Charleston, Carolina, South Carolina. And what we know for sure is that she was never executed. Now, Mary Read, she died of natural causes in prison. And she's buried here at the Spanish Town Cathedral, on the grounds of the Spanish Town Cathedral. And so neither of them got executed. These two women, these two women have been overlooked for most of history. If you look in the history books from the 18th and 19th century, they are hardly mentioned. There's not much mention of them at all, not much in detail about them. But in the 20th and 21st century, there's been a resurgence of interest in their story and in what they did. So we have, for example, on television, Some of you may have seen Black Sails on Netflix. You might see Clara Paget as Anne Bonny in Black Sails. Some of you might play video games called Black Flags. They celebrate these two women in that video game. There are stamps. Well, this is Jack, Calico Jack and Annie. And the next one, stamps issued by the Jamaican government, memorializing these two women and their exploits. And in England, there is a statue in the city of Berg on the coast, a statue of these two women, highly controversial because it was recently done. But anyway, of both of them. What I do prefer, though, is a statuary group in the Bahamas, showing Anne Bonny and Mary Read having each other's back. These women blazed a trail in a male-dominated arena. And whether famous or infamous, I submit they deserve their proper place in history. Mr. Chairman.